And so we are nearly just about ready to take off. The broad plan is to climb to about 10,000 meters, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, and to then start rolling the rocket over to the right, because we're not going straight up. If we were to just go straight up, we would just come straight back down again. The whole point is to get up and start directing the rocket in a direction such that we can then push it into that orbital trajectory. And the way that you basically do that, the easiest way that you do that, is by taking off and pointing it towards 90 degrees on the navigation ball. So this ball down here, we turn the rocket over towards the 90 mark. Initially we do it literally where my mouse is pointing now, literally at a kind of 45-degree angle to the horizon. As we get higher, we'll push it even further over so that it's actually projecting on a horizontal plane. So once we're sure that the top of our trajectory is high enough to get above the atmosphere of the planet, we're then pushing it out along the horizon so that we can achieve that circular orbit. Hopefully that will become clear as to exactly what I mean as and when we get there on the flight. The only other thing to say is that recording this and playing the game is going to tax my computer, so there's probably going to be a bit of a drop in frame rates. Hopefully you'll still be able to see enough to understand what's going on. And the other thing is it may also be quite noisy because of the game audio. Fingers crossed that it records in a way that's relatively clear though. So I'm ready for takeoff. And as you know, it's spacebar to launch the ship. Because it's such a heavy rocket, you can see it's taking off incredibly slowly, so this is actually taking off a lot slower than your little rocket that you made the other day will have done. That's because by far and away the heaviest thing you have on any spaceship is the fuel to get you beyond atmosphere. And this is a jolly big rocket. This was actually originally designed in a much earlier save game that I've got as a lunar lander. So the reason that the capsule's so big on the top of this is because I've actually taken this out to the moons, landed it and brought it back to Kerbin. On this occasion, all we're hoping to do is get it up into orbit. So it really is overkill. This rocket does not need to be as big as it is in order to do what I'm doing, but I wanted to make it so that there was as little possibility of me failing to reach orbit as possible. So we've ascended to about 1,500–2,000 meters. A long way to go yet before we think about staging, before we think about putting a little bit of burn onto our liquid fuel engine, but we will do that in due course. Always keep an eye on the nav ball. Going straight up at this stage, that's fine till we get a little bit higher, when we're going to think about rolling it over towards that 90-degree heading and a 45-degree angle to the planet's surface. What we can do at this stage is press M on the keypad, have a look at the map, and that will show you this little thing here, Kerbin apoapsis. Apoapsis is a fancy way of saying that that's basically the highest point of your trajectory. So at the current time, that's the highest point this rocket is going to reach. And as you can see, it's going up. It's increasing that number because we are burning through that solid fuel. We are still picking up speed. I've just turned on an indicator to show me how much fuel I've got left in this stage, so that's showing me how much solid fuel I've got. When that reaches zero, my liquid fuel engines need to take over, and I need to have them throttled on when they do that. So switching back to this sort of close-up view, we're now up to the 10,000 meter mark. Now this is a little bit risky because manoeuvring a ship when it's still got its solid fuel boosters attached is really quite cumbersome. It's really quite difficult, and this is a massive rocket anyway, so it does move slowly and you can lose control of it. It is cumbersome, but I'm going to very slowly now start trying to roll the whole thing over towards 90 degrees without losing control of it. And because the solid fuel is running out, I'm actually now going to start to increase the rate at which I burn my liquid fuel engine. I'm going to raise it up to about 2/3 the way up there on the left, as you can see. and I've pulled it over towards 90, but you can see it kind of pulling back. It's very heavy. It doesn't want to be pushed over towards the 90. It's not a big issue yet, but it could become a bit of an issue as we ascend. I do not want to lose control of it. I'm now actually going to increase my liquid fuel engine to 100% throttle, so we are burning as fast as we possibly can now through that liquid fuel. And you'll see when the solid fuel runs out, I'm going to stage, I'm going to press the space bar, and I'm going to ditch those solid fuel boosters. Hopefully they don't hit my liquid fuel engine on the way past. If they do, it is a catastrophic failure for the mission, you imagine. So you can see we're out of solid fuel. I'm now going to stage successfully, fingers crossed, and there they go. So the solid fuel has been used up. We're now just under the power of this huge liquid fuel engine. And now I'm trying to keep the heading towards that 90-degree mark at a 45-degree angle to the surface of the planet. And whilst I'm doing that, I'm going to quickly move to map view, see what the height of my climb is, and it's actually now over 100,000 meters. That's more than enough than I need. So I press X on the keyboard, that cuts my throttle, and I'm now just actually ascending under the momentum gathered with that initial burn. So I'm not actually burning any fuel, we're just going to keep going up until we reach a point which is about 30 seconds before apoapsis. So we're going to burn again, we're going to use our liquid fuel engine again at around about the T minus, just there, the T minus 30-second mark, when we're going to do a very sort of slow, very controlled burn on a 90-degree horizontal trajectory. And you can see I'm moving my nav ball around there to try and achieve that. It's going very slowly because of how big this rocket is. Very hard to maneuver. But it will go if you just persist with it. And of course you're using the A, S, D, W keys on the keypad to control the direction. You also use Q and E to control the direction of the rocket. You should have picked that up already, though, I'd have thought, if you've done a little bit of experimenting with it. Okay, so that's the heading. When I get to T minus 30 seconds, I want to burn my engines in a controlled fashion with the objective, basically, of pushing this line out until it becomes a full circle all the way around the planet. So at the moment, it's a waiting game. Okay, so we've skipped on by just under a minute, and we're still waiting for the T minus figure to reach about T minus 30, when we will execute that controlled burn in order to try and create a stable orbit around the planet. As we do that, eventually the rate at which the numbers are receding towards zero will actually slow down, and we have to make a judgment call really throughout as to how much we're going to burn that liquid fuel engine in order to create that stable orbit. So I am now increasing the throttle, as you can see over on the left hand side. I've actually increased it to 2/3 the way up, but the number has actually stabilized around the T minus 27-second mark, and so I'm not going to increase it too much more, because the most efficient way of doing this is to try and keep that number pretty steady, declining at a pretty steady rate. And if you look closely, you'll see, as I'm burning on at that horizontal kind of angle, that line, that trajectory, our direction of travel, it's widening out. It's becoming a really long arc. We want it ultimately to become such a long arc that it meets itself on the other side of the planet. That is when we will have achieved stable orbit. I've now increased my throttle all the way up to 100 because we're only a few seconds before we reach apoapsis, and I'm keen to try and push that line out. A lot of this is just judgment call, though. A lot of this is just kind of trial and error. You'll practice, you'll get better at achieving an orbit I may actually have left it a little bit late to burn, but I should have so much fuel on board that it's not a problem. You can still see that line growing out more and more. I've actually now passed apoapsis, so this is not a very efficient way of doing it, but because I've got so much fuel on board, I should be able still to push that line out beyond the other side of Kerbin. And there it goes, so it's ripped up very quickly then to 96,000 metres. Now you can see that says Kerbin periapsis. The one that we've just passed says Kerbin apoapsis. As we now know, apoapsis is the highest point of our trajectory. Periapsis is the lowest point of our trajectory. But as you can see, it forms a circle, albeit an imperfect circle, around Kerbin. What you don't want is your periapsis to be below 70,000 metres. If your periapsis is below 70,000 metres, that actually is the height at which the atmosphere of the planet starts. And if your ship starts to travel through that atmosphere, it creates drag, and ultimately you might end up deorbiting without intending to. Again, a fancy way of saying you'll basically crash your ship. So periapsis of 96 odd thousand is good, 97,000 metres is good, apoapsis of 107,000 on the other side. And if we go to close-up view, we are gently orbiting around the planet. If you're going to leave it in orbit for any significant amount of time, make sure that you turn off your RCS and SAS, again with the R button and the T button. Most important is that you turn off your SAS because that's powered by electricity, and if you leave it on and you go on the dark side of the planet into the planet's shadow, your solar panels stop working, and you'll basically run out of power. And if you run completely out of power, you won't be able to stage, you won't be able to do separation. That means you won't be able to safely bring your Kerman back to the surface of the planet. Now that we are in orbit, we can do all sorts of exciting things. If I swing the ship round ever so slightly, I'm just going to stabilise it using SAS for a short period, brief period. There we go. What we can now do, for instance, is allow, well, Jebediah's not on board. Maybe he was lost in an earlier mission, I can't remember. But Bob Kerman can do an EVA. That means he can get out of the spaceship, intrepid as he is, on a spacewalk. He's not tethered, so we're not going to have him let go, but you can see him gently orbiting the planet. And now he's going to get back on board.